Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immergence Show. We are diving into a massive question today. In an age where AI makes technology easy to copy, what is a brand real defensible moat? To guide us, we have an incredible guest, a former senior counsel at Google who saw the future from the inside and left to build a better one. Over the next hour, we'll explore his journey, unpack his powerful framework for turning trust into a competitive advantage, and get his playbook for de-risking AI innovation. This is a live and interactive conversation, so get your questions ready, share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to tag a founder or colleague who needs to be in this discussion. Let's get it started. Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hey, Nico, I'm doing great. And thank you so much for having me here today. I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So glad to have you. And we welcome our amazing audience. Please, if you're joining us live, comment, say hi. Would love to hear from you and share your thoughts throughout. All right. So, hi, Ian. Welcome. Yeah, so let's get into a bit about your personal and professional journey, Richard. I briefly mentioned, but I'm sure there's so much more into your great career. Yeah, tell us more. We're excited to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'm a technology policy lawyer by training, actually a lifelong resident of Washington, D.C. So, politics and public policy were in my blood growing up. After law school at Georgetown, I spent 12 years at MCI Communications and then 12 years at Google, which is really has been the highlight of my career. The first 7+ years in the DC area and the last 4 years actually in Mountain View, where I was offered a role, corporate director for strategic initiatives, kind of a crazy made up name, but it was sort of policy counsel to all of the advanced tech, like the AI and quantum computing work the company was doing. And then left in 2018 and was a Mozilla fellow for 3.5 years with the Mozilla Foundation. Went in
Yeah.
house briefly to Twilio. Came out last spring, in time to finish and publish a book last fall called Reweaving the Web, which lays out my case for why we need a trust-based framework to govern the internet and now the AI era. And at the same time, founded a coalition of companies called the GliaNet Alliance. And I'm sure we'll get into both of those during the course of the conversation.
Wow. Thank you for being so brief. There's a lot to discuss and unpack over there. All right. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience over a decade at Google? Can you take us to the specific moment or realization that made you feel like you need to pursue a very different path?
Yeah, I mean, it was a 12-year career. So when I started, it really did feel like I was part of a very small startup just getting out of the garage, right, in 2006 and 7. So
Yeah.
there was a sense of like sort of us against the world. And there were very strong values that were imbued in all of us from the founders. And so we came there thinking we were doing great things for an open web and serving the user. There was no one great moment of clarity or realization, I guess I would say. In the book, I called it realizing what I call the concept of userhood, which, and Doc Searles, I think he's been on this program.
Yeah, he was on our show.
Yeah, and he's been around in this industry a long time. He says, you know what, the only other users we have in the world are drug addicts. And then he talks about how actually that may be, unfortunately, an apt way of thinking about the way we use technology today, or the way it's
Mhm.
foisted on us. Anyway, at Google, I learned a couple things. Why we call people users and not customers or clients or patrons is because users have no inherent rights, right? A user's rights are only whatever the terms of service you have that are unilaterally written by smart lawyers like me to the benefit of the company. And otherwise, there's no real recourse for somebody if the company does something wrong. And the other piece, which came later to me, was, the company did a really great job, and they still today talk about everything they do is for the user, right? User centricity, user empowerment. But then I realized there was a subtext in sitting in some of those product meetings, which was, and we, Google, know what's best for the user. And that
Mhm.
started to increasingly sort of gnaw at me. And so 2018, I decided time to leave. The Mozilla Foundation, Mark Sermon offered me a role there to start working on these ideas that became the GliaNet project, which is idea, again, we'll talk about a sort of an alternative way of building web infrastructure so that all of us are empowered and not mere users on the web.
Wow, fascinating. And what was your role at Mozilla Foundation?
So I was a fellow, senior fellow there. Interestingly, the fellowships are supposed to last for 12 months, but somehow Mark and I kept finding reasons for me to stay for 3.5 years. I
Wow.
think in part because I was working on something that at least he and others there thought was important enough to continue, being developed. So I was really happy to have that time with them.
Amazing. I can't wait to talk about GliaNet and everything else, but let's say hi to our amazing live audience.
Yeah.
Ian is beautifully tagging his friends. I appreciate that. Yes, everyone. Hi, Marilyn. Hi, Brian. Yes, it's happy the Emergence Tuesday. Hi, Mark. And everyone else who's tuning in or watching us, watching the recording. And Brian says, your data is our data. That's what Google says. I mean, all this big tech, right? That's how they monetized originally. And they still, many of them do that. And in this show, actually, we specifically talk about this a lot. So, yeah, I'm glad that there is a better way that, there are better people out there like you trying to establish this path, especially when, government is slow or not doing much about it.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, in my book, I use the term seams to describe the way the web companies have over the years adopted very successfully from their vantage point, right? The infrastructure of what I call surveillance, extraction, analysis, and manipulation. And that this is setting constant feedback loops where they gain all this information about us in these very unilateral terms, and use that in ways to sort of maximize monetization of our personal data, our intentionalities in the world, and all of that. So that's the web paradigm we've had for roughly the last 20 years. And my deep concern is that the AI companies, the big guys, are going down the exact same path. So I think we have a window here to try to change that dynamic.
That's awesome. Yes, I especially heard a lot from the founders that are venture backed. That's common question or ask that they get from their investors, like, "What are you going to do with data? How are you monetizing that?" and so on. So it has become a norm, and we have to break it. And there are better ways to make money. There are better ways to do business. So that's what we're talking about. Awesome. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us. All right, so let's talk about this concept or powerful alternative of net fiduciary that you brought up. This is often associated with doctors, lawyers. Can you explain what are you thinking about? How business owners or founders or all of us in tech should be thinking about having this duty of care or duty of loyalty.
Yeah. So again, in my time in the tech sector, I've came to realize large companies, of course, like Google, but many others now, had the benefit of significant power asymmetries over us. These asymmetries come from expertise that they have that we lack, from the deep pockets they have, and the
Mm.
vulnerabilities that we are required to give them in order for us to benefit from their services. In this case, the vulnerabilities is our personal data. And as a lawyer, I sort of went back and started researching the history of the common law of fiduciaries, because I came to realize over time, societies, whenever there has been this power asymmetry between a group of people and the rest of us, society
Yes.
has essentially demanded that there be these duties of care and loyalty, this notion of being a fiduciary, where one has entrusted power, and that power invites these duties as a way of not completely erasing the power asymmetry, but at least sort of narrowing the gap, as it were, between these large empowered entities and the rest of us. So it seemed to me the common law of this, at least as it goes back in the UK, is some 500 years. Interestingly, most societies have a very similar concept. They just call it different things, different languages, different terms. But this is a very fundamental way that societies have dealt with these situations. And it occurred to me, well, why not then think about this in the context of the web? And there have been some great scholars in the past, Jonathan Zittrain, Jack Balkin, and others have written about this. They have talked about what they call the information fiduciaries. The differential there is that they would like to see these duties imposed on the platforms. So let's say Mark Zuckerberg now has to be a fiduciary, which means you have a duty of loyalty to me, which means my interests predominate over yours. My concern there is that if you do that, that just basically turns that into a compliance situation for them, which means they're like very smart lawyers. figuring out ways to minimize the impact of that company, right? And there's a great phrase, Tamar Frankel, who's a noted expert in fiduciary law, says forced loyalty is no loyalty at all. And I came to really believe that, again, from knowing the folks and the way that their intentions and the way that they looked at the world sitting in Menlo Park or Mountain View or whatever. So I was much more intrigued by the idea that this is not just the right thing to do, not the ethical thing to do, but it is potentially a real market differentiator, that you can demonstrate authentic care and loyalty to your customers, right? They're no longer end users, they're customers, they're patrons, clients of yours, that in turn builds enduring trust. And that trust is the coin of the realm here in the 21st century for the web, but now increasingly, as you talked about, the abundance of AI in the AI era. I think without that trust, most companies are not going to survive, because that's what consumers increasingly are going to expect. So long way of saying, I think there's a real way of bridging the gap of the common law, bring it, but dust it off, bring it into the 21st century and make it relevant again, in this case, for the technologies that we use every day.
Yes, I can't agree more. And like last week we had Liam on the show, and we talked about how it could be possible. You use all these pendants and glasses and watches and all these things, but be able to trust that your data is not going to be used. And so we all need to like have this alternative, and that's an opportunity for founders, for entrepreneurs to like capitalize on building, establishing trust. And Brian is mentioning, I go to meetups here in SF. Whenever I talk to a CEO, mention data, their pupils dilate and their it's quicken. Yeah.
That's the joke. I sit here in the heart of Silicon Valley, right? I live in Redwood City.
Yeah.
As I say, literally a stone's throw from Mark Zuckerberg's office, but I won't go there. But interestingly, yeah, that is when they talk about pitch decks, right, for startups around here, unless the word monetize is on every other page, right?
Yeah.
Many investors, not all of them, and I think a growing number are starting to realize the downsides of that approach, but too many of them are like, yes, you've got to have that monetization, the notion that the end user essentially is like a resource. It's almost like you're a shale of oil, and you got to extract every last bit of data, information, whatever it takes, in order to fully monetize the interaction. I wouldn't even call it a relationship. It's really an interaction. So yeah, to Brian's point, that is absolutely the way, unfortunately, too many startups, and then of course the investors that support them, think about us as end users.
And in the past, we didn't have the alternative. So it was like, yeah, you have Facebook and that's it. Like, what are you going to do? So hopefully we will have more and more better alternatives. So let's now talk about the tangible aspect of this concept. If a startup founder wants to build their moat on this principle from day one, what is the first most critical decision they need to make? Is it in their business model? Is it their product design? Or is it the company culture or something else?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, to me, the moat, ultimately the moat is trustworthiness. And this is also another point I think is bears mentioning. To the last 20 years of the web, roughly speaking, the web companies have done a pretty good job. I think I would call it a marketing job of every time people would raise questions about their motivations, or, why do you need my personal data for this? Or why do I get that creepy ad? Or why do I sit in the middle of this social media feed with people yelling at each other? Basically the core response was, trust us. You could trust us, right? We have your best interests at heart. Don't worry about it. We got this. We have something called a trust and safety department, which I think is, again, an amazing marketing job, right? So when you do something wrong, right, you're supposed to not only create trust, but also safety. And it feels like, what other industry, what other set of companies have trust and safety departments, right? You would assume using their products and their service offerings, things are always going to be safe. Things have passed some sort of tests of safety.
Yeah.
There is some built-in trust, maybe it's through consumer protection laws and regulations or what have you. So the mere fact that they have to have that shows that the notion of trust me isn't really valid. And so to me, if the end goal is trust, now entering particularly this AI era, I think more and more people are going to challenge that. The pushback on is going to be, okay, prove it. You tell me to trust you, prove it. Demonstrate to me tangibly why I should trust you. Again, not just with personal data on the web, but now with a swarm of AI agents ostensibly out there to benefit my interests, to do stuff for me, where I don't know what they're doing. I don't know who you are, why you want access to my wallet, to my identity, to my bank account, and all of that. So I think if you're a startup, the best way to think about this is, okay, if trust is the end goal, the moat, what I'm proposing, one way of doing that is this idea of the fiduciary common law, right? Duties of care and loyalty. That may not be the only way. In fact, I would say there probably are other ways to do that. But I think that the idea of creating authentic trust with your customers needs to be built into your company at the outset. It has to be the mission, right? It has to be part of the value statement, has to be, and I think it has to be part of the culture. Certainly the business model has to reflect that. I think the way the products are designed, the technology standards you adopt, all of that needs to be sort of imbued with this, I think, simple, complex, but I think simple and ultimately empowering notion of building authentic trust with your customer base. Again, I think the fiduciary laws of the principles of care and loyalty are one really powerful way of doing that. Again, I'm the first to say there may be others, but the moat is trust. You've got to put that into the DNA of your organization at the outset.
Sounds great. Maybe tell us now about your coalition and what you actually do practically to help companies do better.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm trying to prove the hard case. This is not just the ethically sound thing to do, that this is a market differentiator, that this is a way to achieve success in the marketplace. So that is not the easiest thing to demonstrate. 2 months ago, I gave a talk at the Unicorn Summit in Lisbon, and probably guessed by the name, hundreds of would-be unicorns, small startups were there in the audience, all eager to learn what they should do to monetize the next generation of folks, in this case, using AI platforms and agents. And so there I noted that we have this coming abundance of AI, right? As you noted at the outset, Nico. And I think the sheer volume of this, first, of course, we had the platforms, but now with the agents and all the other applications and all the devices around us, we're already seeing what I've been calling the summer of AI slop, right? We're seeing the low grade content, the video feeds, the deep fakes that are sort of almost accurate, but not quite. And that can be sort of amusing or annoying at times. But I do fervently believe we're rapidly entering what I'm calling the winter of AI fraud. And that means that the folks are using the democratizing aspects of this technology, ironically, to figure out how to screw us over, right? As consumers, as citizens, as human beings. And so with that experience out there of slop and now fraud, many consumers, I think, are going to start walking away. They're going to turn away and say, I don't need this in my life. What the heck are you foisting on me? So if you could be the entity, the one that raises the hand and say, no, you can trust me. I'm an intermediary that has built in these fiduciary duties of care and loyalty. Here's exactly what that means. Here's my trust mark that demonstrates that. Here's the recourse if something goes wrong. If you can prove that to somebody, much like a trusted doctor, trusted lawyer, financial advisor, people will respond favorably. And so that coalition of 22 companies who joined with us last fall became the GliaNet Alliance. And the point of the alliance is to build out the intellectual infrastructure for what it means to be a net fiduciary in the world. What kind of business models rate? What kind of policies and practices do you need? What technology standards to adopt? What public policy positions to take on? How do we spread the message about how to raise people's expectations in the world? That's basically what the alliance has come together to work on.
Wow, that's really powerful. And I heard about this through Quai. Brian is also attending some of those, and many others, and maybe not audience. I would love to hear from you. What are some of the type of companies that you have seen in your coalition, and maybe what type of companies this applies more?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really grateful for is the companies there. One, that they're willing to join with us. And I should say, we have no obligations. Membership is free. The only obligation is to work with us, is to collaborate on building these elements out, which I know for startup founders, your time is extremely precious. So we don't ask for more than little snippets here and there. But the idea is working together collectively. We're stronger than we are individually. And so the companies there include, you mentioned Quai, Reza Razul, who's a former CTO at Real Networks, has set up Quai, which is an open source, volunteer-based approach towards an AI platform. So it's an LLM that's intended to be fabric for people then to build all kinds of agents on top of that in a pure open source fashion. Love the fact that Reza is there. We also have a different kind of AI company, Personal.ai, and they build agents that are essentially avatars using small language models, or they call personal language model approaches, right? So based on your information, maybe it's you as an individual, maybe you're a small business, maybe you're like a medical office, for example. All that data then becomes part of the sets of avatars they create that then can interact with each other. Consumer Reports is certainly by far the largest organization we have as a member. They have over 6 million users, consumers of their services. And they're building out something they call permission slip, which is a standard that would allow AI agents to be represented by Consumer Reports in things like the first instantiation is around customer service complaints. So Verizon owes me $30. I could go try to knock on the door. Good luck. But if I have an AI agent trained by Consumer Reports, can go and act as me, probably has a much greater chance. And then AI, maybe Consumer Reports takes $1 or something off the top as a sort of a finder's fee. We also have a smart city project, Helpful Places. We've got cybersecurity companies. We've got data protection companies. We've got a social media platform, Reliable. So the nice thing about what we've put together here is I think it's fairly representative of the different kinds of technologies and businesses that are at play in the web, and hopefully increasingly now in the AI era.
Amazing. I can't wait to dive deeper into this, because I want to understand what are some of the actions that companies have taken. But before that, let's get into some of our comments and questions in the chat. Brian mentioned we need a new web infrastructure that provides an open governance of the upcoming web of agentic systems. What do you think about that, Richard?
Yes. The challenge is, how do we get there from here? The current web infrastructure, the World Wide Web, we've got, of course, Sir Tim Berners-Lee came up with the protocol in the early 90s. We have the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. We have, of course, the internet underneath that. So we have ICANN and ITF. So you have basic elements of the infrastructure for the web that, unfortunately, the web platform companies have done a really good job of co-opting in ways that, again, as I mentioned before, the power has shifted towards them in the cloud with browsers, with third-party cookies and all the things that they've built on top of that. So that we're at the point that even Sir Tim has said, what I built is probably no longer what I want. So he has his solid project, which is attempting to create a technology that gives people more rights over their data. So we absolutely do need a new web infrastructure. And then governance of the upcoming web of agentic systems, yes. Again, from where I sit, it has to be both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So as much as we should be pushing for, hopefully, governments and nonprofits and hopefully, well-intentioned companies to figure out what that higher level oversight infrastructure might look like, I'm working with the companies at the bottom who are trying to incorporate that into their businesses, into their terms of service and their terms of, and their privacy policies and all of that. And then hopefully maybe there's a way that they can sort of meet in the middle.
Amazing. Thank you for the comment, Brian, and thanks for the thoughts. And Maria says, the way I see trust is not a one statement, and you cannot prove it by asking. Trust is being built over time. That's actually pretty true. What do you think about that, Richard? Because someone can say I'm trustworthy.
Yes.
As you said, a lot of these big tech have trust and safety departments. But what is real proof?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And that is a correct statement, right? Trust is not a one-off, and trust doesn't happen overnight. In fact, it's much easier. It's much easier to destroy trust with one bad act than it is to build trust. It takes months of actions. And that's, if you look at some of the basic psychological literature around human trust, much of that started in the early days as a species was between families, close friends. right? We knew each other, we knew reputations, we had interactions. There was recourse if something went wrong, if there was a mistake or whatever. As we grew bigger, of course, we started putting more and more trust into our social institutions. I don't need to remind anybody today, our social institutions trust levels are all-time low for most people, political, economic, religious, you name it.
Yeah.
And the web, as I say, the web didn't create that, but the web certainly has exacerbated that with the way that social media companies have been set up and all of that, driving engagement and trying to increase monetization. So trust is something that develops over time. The way we think about it within the GliaNet Alliance is initially creating some sort of a trust mark. So something that says, much as you can say Better Business Bureau, there's an organization behind it. You can kick the tires, you can understand where they're coming from, see what their criteria is, how difficult it is to achieve that status. And hopefully having that trust mark, it's not going to create all authentic trust on day one, but hopefully it's enough of a way to inducement for somebody to open the door a bit and say, okay, interesting, tell me more, or let's work together. And then that's where the actual actions creates the real trust. So the trust mark is sort of the invitation. The authentic trust builds over time. So that at least is the theory of the case that we're attempting to prove.
So is it that you guys kind of audit, like at the GliaNet, you audit these companies too over time to make sure they're, following the guidelines?
So we've been in existence for about a year. And so we are at what we call phase 3 of our existence, which is creating a community of practice. So we've built up these working groups to figure out some of these harder questions I mentioned, like what is an acceptable business model? Can I sell somebody's personal data as part of the business model? I think the answer is yes, but you have all the very express, carefully laid out consent around that, not just the mere one-offs that we see, unfortunately, through cookie
Yeah.
browser, things like that. Something where
Yeah.
somebody understands the scope, the context, can pull at any time, pull it back if they decide they're not happy, right? So that has to be sort of built in at the outset. But we realize that is informal way of doing it. So we're now what we call phase 4. Phase 4 is developing essentially a pledge. So it's built off of a template we've developed that takes these duties of care and loyalty, spells them out, and then any company can adopt those duties, put that into their terms of service, their privacy policy, right, their master terms agreement, their contracts, all of that, and it becomes theirs. So it becomes part of who they are as much as anything else they develop unilaterally. So the point there is it's flexible, lightweight. The downside, of course, is the recourse is limited to this is a company saying it. The company can change their mind or whatever. But there's a pledge mark that says we have pledged to this. And so that we think of this as the interim but important phase of developing the full-blown, what we're now calling phase 5, which is a self-regulating organization. So that's where you really have certification. You've got a licensing regime. You have a governance of a board of directors, and you've got everything all spelled out. You've got an enforcement regime. You have a certification mark that can be challenged and pulled if somebody does something wrong. So as you mentioned, audits, I think, are likely have to be part of that. That's the big enchilada. That's the thing we're aiming for. Probably next year, maybe second half of next year. It all depends upon sort of how we can get funding and how we can develop that going forward. But right now we're in the pledge mark phase. We have 2 companies pledged so far. Out of our 22, we have 4 or 5 more in the hopper. So I'm hoping by sometime this fall, we will have roughly half a dozen of the member companies who are pledged GliaNet fiduciaries. And then that in turn will give us some really important signals about how this actually works in the marketplace. What are they hearing then from customers? How are they responding to this? How do investors think about this, right? How do employees, do they find this something that gives them a sense of meaning and mission in what they're doing? So getting those kinds of signals from the markets is really important to see what lessons to learn, then to apply in the so-called phase 5, the self-regulating organization or trade association.
Amazing. Well, that's a lot of effort, I'm sure, and huge impact and legacy. Thank you for doing that. And it totally makes sense to take it in phases. It's a huge change of habits, and the way we have been used to for many, many years, individually and professionally as a company. So yeah, this is going to be taking time. Is there a North Star for you? Has there been another company or organization that has done something like this before that got adopted and, virally adopted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We're conducting a landscape, what they call landscape analysis, to see who else might be out there. We haven't seen anybody yet. So a lot of the certifications that I've seen or the trust marks have gone to the technologies, right? So you build a technology, maybe that means it's been designed, implemented in a certain fashion, maybe consistent with certain standards or criteria, then you get that sort of trust mark. So let me call it the cyber mark. Cyber trust mark is an example of that. But the ones I have seen have typically only focused on the technology or the particular deployment of the technology. They don't do anything around the governance. What I think in governance is basically the rules of the road, in this case,
Yeah.
for a company, a for-profit company, to provide services to the public. So in my way of thinking, the two need to be joined. You have to have both the design, implementation of technologies that empower people and the governance to ensure that it actually happens, that the two are highly complementary. They work together. And so I have seen, again, some marks on the technology side. I have not yet seen anything in parallel in terms of what we're trying to build, which is both exciting that we're hopefully building, we're sort of filling a gap. And it's daunting because if we're the first, we're bound to make some mistakes. So this is also why we want to do this sort of phase to phase 3 to phase 4 to phase 5, hopefully learn what we can along the way and create ultimately what I'm calling the net fiduciaries playbook. So like a single thing I can hand to somebody and say, you want to be a net fiduciary in the world, here's what you need to do. Here's what the policies and practices you adopt. Here's the way to think about your business model, all the elements and pieces that somebody could sort of essentially plug into their existing business and fairly quickly become a fiduciary in the marketplace.
Or maybe an AI agent that is
AI agent, yes.
doing
I saw an announcement
doing-
that the first wholly AI company is now in the world. So founded by AI agent, I'm assuming a corporation followed by AI agent. So that's we're going down that road, and that's look, I'm not a Luddite. I love what these new technologies can do. My only point is that the technology should be working for us. They should not be applied to us as the passive recipients, right? Which is the way we've been treated way too often and too long with the web.
Well said. And I want to get into some of the examples of that, but let's look at some of the comments. Dan from Kauai is representing. Thank you for being with us, Dan. And then Ian said that's a mural in a black alley somewhere. Yes, it's a great differentiator. And Brian mentioned
Nice.
Project Nanda has an interesting approach. Although they recently shot themselves in the foot, confidential computing has the concept of an audible, trusted execution environment that could lay a foundation of ensuring trust. And he's commenting so much because he has a product idea that aligns with this. Awesome. We can't wait to hear more, Brian.
Yeah,
Any
Brian,
thoughts?
company number 23 in the alliance. So please get that
Yes.
product built.
Why not?
Yeah, Project Nanda. I don't know a ton about it. I've heard a little bit. Again, I think, it is this idea of creating this sort of trusted execution environment, which sounds very cool. Again, it is on the mostly as I understand it best, it's on the technology side. And my litmus test is if any company, and I won't pick on anybody, but let's just say Mark Zuckerberg were to adopt the technology and then basically turn it into something that supports his business model, right? So take the trusted execution environment. Maybe that serves internal purposes. Yes, we want that audit to make sure we know where the data is going internally. But in terms of its actual use case in the web or on AI, it's just following the same old playbook that the web companies have been using the last 20 years. Then unfortunately, it's not sufficient. That's where you need the human governance element to come in so that the both of them work together. MIT, exactly. And MIT's had some great stuff. One of our companies, FID, has taken on board something called the OPAL, which is the Open Algorithm Protocol, developed at MIT by Sandy Pentland and others. And the notion there is very simple. It's like, rather than my data going all over the world, why can't the algorithms that need my data come to me? And the best case I can think of, and is actually this is where it came about, is in credit scoring. So you have credit breaches all the time, hundreds of millions of accounts that are breached.
Yeah.
Bad guys get access to it. Why is that? Because it's sitting on server farms all over the world, 24/7. They become, in the term of art, they become honeypots. They become places people want to go and get access to it. They're going to use all their efforts to do that. What if you change the dynamic to say, okay, I'm going to go buy a car. You don't need to have all that information sitting at the server farm. All you need to know is, do I meet the standard? A thumbs up or a thumbs down. So this
Mm.
algorithm moves to the data. Maybe it's on my personal device, right? And just interacts with it long enough, does an analysis, thumbs up, drops the data. So it never actually possesses it, goes back, and that check mark becomes the basis for a successful credit application, right? That it accomplishes the exact same thing, but in terms of the risk and liability to the underlying company, and of course to the consumer, you've greatly reduced that by just taking this simple technical fix. So it's great that FID is the first company that's actually putting that in the marketplace. But MIT has been, back to the original point, and I apologize, a bit of a diversion, but MIT has been really the focal point of some very cool technologies that are now being adopted. And again, to me, the only additional element is have that human governance layer that says, and this technology is being used in ways that build authentic trust with the consumer.
The example you mentioned reminded me of zero knowledge proof in Web3. Yeah, so there are a lot of these, it's just a matter of like wanting and trying to do better, I guess. There are alternatives. We just need to, focus on them and bring them into practical applications.
Yeah, zero knowledge proof is a very similar concept. I think of it as a bit more passively. It's just about how much of myself I reveal to somebody, if,
Mhm.
say, going to their website or going to interact with them. So sort of me in the world in there. Opal just sort of reversing that to say, how much do I need to reveal of myself if I bring somebody in here that
Mhm.
already sort of switches that dynamic. So I'm much more in control of that, sort of that set of interactions. Homomorphic encryption is another one. Again, encryption
Yeah.
can be used in lots of different ways, end to end. It protects people, but also protects companies. So how is it being utilized so that the ordinary individual is also benefited as much as the company is employing it?
Great point. Let's talk about like open source AI, which has become, very common these days for companies to like, go and integrate open source AI. Is there anything that you think could go wrong on that side, and what the solution would be?
Yes, I mean open source. I'm a lawyer, so my knowledge of the technology is often a bit limited, but certainly the history of modern technology has shown over and over again the really democratizing power of open source. Right from the
Mhm.
very beginnings of the internet and the web, what was built into them. Of course, many of the companies have built out on top of open source. So even as they're making money, they're making it, sort of on the backs of open source software, for example. And so in AI, where we have the current, very large LLMs for profit, they're being built by the big companies. We absolutely need open source projects like Quai and others to provide people with alternatives. And particularly in a case like Quai, where they're not just building the technology, they see the need to have that authentic trust by being a fiduciary. And so that, I think, again, I would say open source, like all these other technologies we just touched on, can be hugely important to empowering folks. Now just add that human governance layer, the fiduciary trust governance layer, as I call it. A lot of words, but the idea is to bring those elements of care and loyalty into the dynamic so that open source can truly be unleashed in ways that democratize, all through all the different layers and not just a particular source code, for example.
Amazing. And Brian says open source and SLM are the future.
Small language
Yeah.
models, absolutely. That's again one of the dynamics here. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nico, but I mean we're at the point where all this billions and billions of dollars imported into LLMs. We've got data centers that are being built all over the world. They're going to sap our energy and make climate change worse, and all of this. And it may well be that this has all been done prematurely. That the small language model approach, or at least a hybrid between large and small language model, may actually be the one that survives and flourishes. And the SLMs, of course, as I've read it, and the paper just came out from NVIDIA not too long ago, says, yeah, you can't really build a great AI agent on top of an LLM. That SLMs, the small language models, is the way to go. So NVIDIA is saying that, and they, of course, are hugely invested in the current paradigm. I think we should all pay attention to that. But I also find that to be encouraging, because if the technology is more, quote, at the edge with these other edge-based technologies, then it gives us more opportunity, maybe in conjunction with an open source LLM like Quai or other types of platforms, to build really cool business models on top of that put the individual first.
Yeah, and again, thankfully, there are so many options to choose from. Like last week, we talked to Liam, and this companion intelligence helping us to have our own servers and protect our privacy and, not have to be reliant on cloud. So it's like we have to just like be conscious and as a consumer or customer, not the user, we should be looking for better alternatives than what has been convenient.
The other one of
um,
the is that what I call the technology optimists, the people that tend to think,
mhm.
put everything in the technology and you make it, and nothing against them, and they build some brilliant stuff, but a lot of them I think tend to have an over exaggerated notion of what the average person is willing to do uh,
Yeah.
in terms of dealing with the technology. So
Mhm.
uh, it's one thing to say, for example, oh, you use blockchain, you have some tokens and you have some numbers and you have some words you memorize, but you don't put it anywhere, don't write it down, for God's sake, someone will steal it. But you go through all these steps that make the technology, which could be amazing, but you
Yeah.
make it so complex that most ordinary people just don't want to go there. So one of the
Yeah.
other aspects of being this fiduciary in the world is we're attaching that to an actual entity, right? A trusted intermediary. So it's, again, my thesis that over time, the web companies have become our intermediaries. We didn't will them into existence. They sort of showed up and sort of shoved their way into our lives, right? So we have intermediaries today. The difference is we need intermediaries that act on our behalf, right? And they deploy the technology, not just to put it out there and say, here, have fun with this and walk away, but you build models around that. You build consumer offerings, things that people want in their lives, things that make their lives easier, save them money, right? Save them steps, all the things that just to think through the consumer's eyes, and much as, again, like Consumer Reports is doing with their rollout. So it can't just be the tech having it. It just can't be the tech that you put in somebody's plate. There needs to be somebody there to hold your hand, help you understand what's going on behind the scenes, and then build value that people really will respond to. That to me is what creates a marketplace: willing buyers, willing sellers, and so that, I think, unfortunately has been what has been missing, and missing element in much of the really cool edge-based technologies that have been built in recent years.
Yeah, technology could be really powerful, but if you don't translate it or make the user interface easy and seamless, then yeah, not going to be adopted. The challenge we saw with Web3 and many other great technologies. Awesome. So from all these 22 companies, is there one that you think they have done some good work? I mean, I'm sure all of them have done great work, but like something that you can share with us, an example of, since they joined, what are some of the actions they took? What did they see or observe from, their customers' reaction, or, any other success story you can share with us?
Yeah, Nico, that's a hugely unfair question. It's like asking me to say which of my 22 children I love the most. I think they all do amazing stuff. I touched on Consumer Reports already because in many ways they can be the most influential, just given the brand and the size and scope of the folks they work with today, and their intentions. Ben Moskowitz, who heads up their digital sort of side, is taking some, I think, some really important steps to make them really relevant in the coming AI era in ways that, again, are looking at very concrete things to help improve people's lives. As I mentioned, this first case of customer complaints. Another one that has been talked about is manage my online subscriptions for me. Right, I have subscriptions to web platforms, to
Yeah.
countless things around the web. All my channels on my cable box, all of that. I can't keep track of half of it. I don't know which credit card it went on to. I mean, this is
Mm.
very like mundane seeming stuff and I submit that, but it's also something where people would say, hell yeah, I would pay $5 a month, $8 a month, whatever, if you give me an agent that monitors all of my online subscriptions, pays them on time for me, brings to me discounts I wasn't aware of, suggests I switch or drop if I have been using it for 3 months, give me alternatives that they think I would find useful and beneficial, find me free alternatives, right? It's constantly out there for me, not for anybody else. I, the consumer, would probably pay you some money for that. So that's another use case that I think Consumer Reports and others have looked at. So I think the more you can figure out ways to solve existing problems that people face, or beyond the problems, empower me. Give me a chance, for example, to have a universal browser that's my browser that goes out with my terms of service and looks around and only goes to websites that maybe meet my standards. Again, flip the dynamic. It's not about their terms of service anymore. It's mine. So if those are the
Mhm.
companies like Consumer Reports and other member companies and the Gleanet Alliance that are looking at those kinds of use cases, because that's where the customer satisfaction is, and then of course that's ultimately where the money will be.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, these mission-driven businesses are going to really stand out. And then, not just saying it, but actually doing it and, going through these phases and actions. And that would be trackable, hopefully. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, what is your prediction about the relationship between brands, consumers, and AI in the next 3 years? Do you think something is going to come from the government, or is it something that that's the consumers are going to ask for it, or is that the more proactive approach that you're proposing going to be this path?
Well, I think one, unfortunately, fairly easy prediction is that the governments are not really going to do much that's beneficial. They were already behind the curve on the LLMs. They did some stuff. I think what they did at the AI Act in Europe. You can quibble over some of the details, but the basic point of trying to take off the table the riskiest use cases, AI agents, AI models that are running nuclear power plants without supervision, for example. Yeah, that feels like it's a legitimate role for government to step in and make sure that's not happening. As I say, they set the guardrails for what cannot be done. They did not address anything within the guardrails. So what is the open marketplace now providing to people? And we're already seeing some of these terrible examples of people listening to agents, teenagers committing suicide and things of that nature. Recently, I think Sam Altman said we should all have a therapist, like a therapist agent. And I agree. My only point is I don't want it to be his. I want mine. I want one that
Yeah.
I can choose that I'm pretty sure is doing what is doing for my benefit, not because maybe my data is being trained is being used as training fodder and or sold off to data brokers, or worse, that my intentionalities, maybe the confidences I share are being betrayed or given to insurance companies, or they're given to advertisers or others, so that in my weakest points, they're actually taking advantage of me. So I think so. Anyway, coming back to sort of the predictions, the government probably won't. Governments may do some things, but probably won't be sufficient. So I think it really comes down to what happens in the marketplace. And I do believe with AI and AI agents, we are now hitting a point where, because they're going to start getting so deeply into our lives in terms of our psychology, our wants and our needs. These are points where people are going to say it's not just giving you personal data for the free cat videos. Now it's something really intrinsic to my being as a person. I think you will see a bit of an uprising, and people who there'll be like a community of people who will start saying, "Hell no, I'll never use an agent in my life because I can't trust them." So without authentic trust, I do believe the newborn age of agents is not going to succeed. And so I come back to the thesis: you need to build that trust in order for the technology to actually survive and even flourish in the marketplace. So I think that's sort of the best prediction I can give you for now.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like we're in a bubble on LinkedIn, maybe specifically, or maybe on X. A lot of us are technologists or like very tech savvy, and we are so open, and we want to try new things, and AI is definitely the way to go. But like when we go to the real world, we see that most day-to-day people, they don't want to even touch anything AI because they're scared, or even like these traditional terms and services are scary to them. And like I remember going to doctor and seeing someone asking for written terms and services to read and like word by word analyze, and that was quite surprising to me. But yeah, there are people out there, a lot of people that are very concerned And it's our responsibilities as technologists to kind of care for them and build solutions for their concerns, and make it not so complicated and not so different than what is out there,
Yeah.
so they can have a choice.
Yeah, I can also say that, there's so much concern that's been expressed in recent months around jobs, right? About AI is going to take half the jobs in the world, right? And I think there's just 2 points there. One is AI is not going to do anything unless the underlying company or government agency or whoever takes that action, right? So again, this notion of sort of technology determinism. If the capability is there, therefore we're going to use it to the max. If that means we put half of the world on universal basic income, so be it. That's all about progress and innovation. So I think
Yeah.
that's just wrong. We don't have to go down certain roads if we don't think we need to as a society. But the second point is that it's also treating technology as something putting us back in the user mode, right? We are the passive recipients of decisions made by others. And technology, in my mind, should be better than that. Technology should give us the tools to better represent our interests in an advanced, online space. And so in this situation, for example, if you have AI agents to represent you, they can also, in some ways, make you a better employee. They can make you a more attractive member of the workforce. If this agent has, brought in different aspects of your capabilities or takes on board expertise that you lack currently today, just as a single analog human being, right? And so an empowerment doesn't just have to be limited to you as a consumer or as a citizen. It can be you in a broader sense, that the notion of agents can represent you in the market in ways that, unfortunately, today they just think about us as we're just almost fodder that just goes away if these agents get so advanced that they can take our places. I think that's both disappointing, but it's missing the point about what it is to be human.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Felipe is asking, does embracing a fiduciary model mean sacrificing the speed of agile development? How do you balance shipping features quickly with this deep-seated responsibility? I think that's a good point. We talk about like mission of the company and all that, but what about like on the practical, technical side?
Yeah. And again, at the Unicorn Summit, in my talk, I discussed the tech spirit animals. And so obviously the unicorn is the spirit animal of ship it quickly, disruptive innovation, rapid growth, all of that, right? Nothing wrong with it. That's all fine. The problem is if that's the only spirit animal you have, then you may start making decisions, cutting corners in ways that the ordinary person that you claim you're serving may actually suffer the consequences. So I introduced another spirit animal, the Akita, which is by all accounts one of the most loyal dogs in the world. It's from Japan.
Wow.
And trustworthy, loyalty, these are all the terms that are abide by this dog. It's also fiercely protective of the family and very wary of strangers.
Nice.
So I sort of brought that in the mix and said, it's not that these are either ors. It can be both. You can both, in this case, ship a product quickly, but also just do a couple quick checks to make sure, again, under the duty of care, that you're taking reasonable and prudent steps that this thing is not going to harm people. And if that is too much for you to do at the outset, then I think, maybe you're going to need to go to another business, frankly, because that should be the table stakes, right? Not harming somebody. If you have the duty of loyalty, that is a bigger deal. And so some companies may decide, I'm comfortable with the duty of care, the reasonable, prudent steps to protect and not harm people. I'm not sure I can get to this loyalty thing. That's a bridge too far. That's okay. Again, this is all voluntary. This is about what companies see by balancing their interests with what they see in the marketplace. So, to Philippe's point, if shipping the code, as long as I can do it in a way that I'm not harming people, but I don't feel like I can do much more than that, great. That's fine. That's an appropriate trade-off, I think, for somebody to decide to make. I'm much more concerned if somebody said, well, I don't want to do any kind of that. Like, I have no duty of care to anybody. Just get the code out there and cash the checks. And that has been the prevailing ethos of too many companies for too many years in Silicon Valley.
Go fast and break things. So Brian is saying agile development must also embrace security as well as fiduciary responsibility. AI can help with this. Well said. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, that's another whole really fascinating area is what's been called fiduciary AI. So they're starting to figure out how do you embed these duties in the agents themselves. So as I mentioned, you need the human for sure. It's what I call the human governance, but then you've got the agents. But how do you ensure the agents are being designed and built in certain ways, how are those duties actually embedded in the software itself? And so that can also, I think, to Brian's point, if you build agents that are looking for certain things, right, to ensure the steps you're taking comport with the policies and practices that you have adopted and you put out in the world, the AI can certainly, I would think, can do that probably faster and more efficiently than an ordinary human being by themselves. So I think that's a correct observation.
Amazing. Thank you. And as we're approaching towards the end of the show, I would love for you to share a bit more about your book, your GliNet Alliance, and how can people join, what are the steps and all of that, where they can find their book.
Yeah, Reweaving the Web. It's found on the Monopoly platform. I'm sorry, the online bookseller, Amazon. It's in hardback, paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Please check us out. It won a design award, which I'm very proud of. It's intended to be something that's it's not some thick, heavy tome. It has lots of stories and examples, narratives, diagrams, illustrations to make it more accessible. And it just makes the basic point that the current web is not what it should be. And then most of the book is not just about that. It's about, okay, what do we do about it? So it walks through the notion of fiduciaries. It also talks a fair amount about the agents. So I was thankfully prescient enough to realize that the AI agents was going to be the place where a lot of this was going to sort of come about in the market. And so it's about fiduciaries and agents. That's the real focus in the book. And then the back end talks about how do we make this happen, the GliNet Alliance and some of the steps we're taking around that. So yeah, I'd love for people to take a look at that. And then in the coming months, we're focused on getting as many of the pledged companies out the door, learning whatever lessons we can from their experiences in the marketplace, and then taking the necessary steps to create that self-regulating Net Fiduciaries Association, trademarked. So just so you know, not for any offensive purposes, but just to play defense, because it is a cruel world out there, right? But yeah, we're very excited that there's a window opportunity right now to with the AI agent space and this notion of growing distrust with the web companies anyway, to create an alternative that people can flock to. So that'll be my focus in the next years.
Amazing. How people can join?
Go to the website. It's glianetalliance.org. You can read up all about us there. We have copies of all of our filings we've made publicly, our statement of interest, our roadmaps, and all of that. And then you can go to the bottom and just leave your email address and somebody can get back to you. Also, frankly, reach out to me directly, richard@glia.net, GLIA.net. And I know Stephanie Gouveia is also on here. So Stephanie@glia.net. She's our head of community operations with the Alliance. But yeah, reach out. Love to answer questions. As I mentioned at the outset, membership is free. To me, it's about, we have a nonprofit that's basically built around for-profit companies. It's all about proving the case and working with really cool companies who are collaborating every day, which is another part I find really gratifying, is that companies have found each other, filled technical gaps, talked about ways they can coordinate and collaborate in the market. So that's really cool too. So yeah, please come knock on the door and love to talk.
So it's like a community that you have created, and it's not necessarily that you're going to share all of the best practices. They're going to figure it out together as well.
Well, and that's another thing I wanted to mention. We are open sourcing. We talked about open source earlier. We're open sourcing all of this. So whatever we develop, I mentioned the Fiduciaries playbook. We're not going to put it in some tome, some whatever, and charge $10,000 for it. The point is to get this in the world, to get people interacting with it, trying it out, kicking the tires, adding, subtracting, whatever works for them. So the lessons we're learning, hopefully we're going to be putting out in so anybody can take a look at it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Richard. This was so insightful. I can't wait for more companies to join this movement. This is just the beginning. And 1 year in, you already made a lot of waves and progress. And thanks to our amazing audience for engaging and being part of such an important discussion. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Brian, for all the great questions and comments. Thank you, Felipe. We had Marius and Marilyn, Mark, and many others that joined us live, and Jonathan, or will be watching the recording. We're so grateful for you. Next week, same time, please join us. We may or may not have an AI guest. So
Ooh, interesting. An
that
actual
is,
AI agent, an AI agent is the guest. That'd
yeah,
be
you will see. But I'm very excited. Actually, one of the big active contributors of Kwai is going to be the guest with an AI friend. So it's going to be really exciting. I'm so pumped about it. You
I
do
think
not
I
want
know
to
who that
miss.
is. I think I know who that is. Yeah. No, that'll be a great show.
Well, let's let's wait for the announcement. Thank you so much, Richard. Really excited for what's next for you. And thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, folks. Take care. Bye bye.